You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report. You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge. This is the Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. Joining me once again is Slava Rabinovich from Moscow, Russia. And the first subject for conversation are Panama Papers that have just been released. And apparently 11 million documents were leaked from one of the world's most secretive companies, Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. They show how Mossack Fonseca has helped clients launder money, dodge sanctions, and evade taxes. Slava, is this significant in your opinion?
It is both significant and insignificant at the same time, or it might be so, depending on what is the definition of that. Internationally, sure, it is extremely significant, and it is of the scale of corruption accusations and corruption scandals with which we saw many years ago in the Philippines and many other countries, and it also one can recollect the story of Muammar Gaddafi, but not I'm referring not to his death, but rather to the details of his corruption investigations against him, and also the freezing of his assets several months prior to what happened to him in the end. In this situation, you have many other scandals around Putin, and not only huge corruption accusations over the last years. There has been numerous movies, films about it, including a BBC documentary. There were other movies, including those of Russian film directors, and the most famous movie was called "Who is Mr. Putin?" written out in one word. But since then, there were also much more serious accusations of such crimes as murder, and in fact that was the murder of Alexander Litvinenko in the center of London, a murder carried out on the orders of the Russian government by means of poisoning Litvinenko with radioactive materials. And this was not only a murder of a British citizen, but it was in fact a terrorist act by way of handling radioactive materials, hazardous materials in the center of London.
So, Slava, the case against Putin has been made many times over by movies, different investigations. Here we have more proof that he's involved in laundering money. But the difference seems to be which country is affected, because this is a worldwide leak that affects many different countries and different leaders, most of them dictators. I am a little surprised how Iceland Prime Minister or Prime Minister was on the list, I guess, and he resigned immediately. So there's a difference between Iceland and Russia. But it sounds like in Russia this is just not going to play, not going to have a very loud resonance. Or do you think it will?
It's difficult to say what is going to tip this one way or another. In a normal world, in a normal country, of course, it's an immediate resignation. But last week, for example, the Russian media leaked numerous reports about Putin's friends giving out very expensive real estate assets, real estate, houses, and apartments to Putin's ladies, such as his post-wife companion, world champion in gymnastics, Alina Kabaeva, with whom he reportedly has several children already. So her sister and her grandmother received very expensive apartments and houses from a associate of a close Putin's friend with last name Rotenberg, Arkady Rotenberg, whom is a childhood friend of Vladimir Putin and also his partner in judo from his early years in Leningrad. And his associate reportedly gave these apartments to these Putin's, so to speak, relatives. Since the Putin's coming to power, all of his friends, such as Arkady Rotenberg, all of a sudden became multi-billionaires.
Well, it's because of their great business acumen,
right.
Isn't it?
Your sarcasm is appreciated here. It's not gonna be appreciated anywhere else in the official press in Russia, and most importantly by the Kremlin spokesperson, who is going to tell you that without any sarcasm, obviously these noble gentlemen have nothing to do with their relationship to Mr. Putin. They earned their money in an honest way. But between those people who in the know, we do know that approximately $2 trillion was stolen from the Russian budget over the last 16 years while Putin was in power.
But if the pressure is, maybe pressure will increase from the outside. Maybe there will be some new sanctions, maybe not even. But the pressure from inside country is not likely to increase because of such revelations. It just seems like this is something that people take as something that just happens.
This incredible story about the apartments is just another proof of what you just said. Because the so to speak, quote-unquote, common people reflection on this is that, a true man has to support his woman, and including the housing, and Putin is right to do that. I mean, we are dealing with people who are still in their not even teens. We are talking about general public with democratic and social and politics understanding of the world of a 9-year-old, unfortunately. So, but at the same time, you also correct in saying that the outside pressure is going to increase even further. And what do I really hope for is for the U.S. to start a huge investigation into any type of money laundering done with the help of U.S. banks in U.S. currency. Because if that is the case, if Putin and his friends are laundering money which they got in via criminal activity, obviously including corruption activities, while Putin was in the office and his friends benefiting from this. If this money has been laundered in U.S. dollars using U.S. banks, or at least U.S. correspondent banks for the US dollar accounts of foreign banks, foreign to the US. It doesn't really matter, so it's going to be a US trail, and the laundered money has moved via the US in this respect, and Putin has to be subject to the US investigation, and responsible for committing crimes with U.S. currency via U.S. banks. That would be a really big thing.
Well, it seems to me that the term that you have been using, made popular, the Russian toxicity, would only increase from such development, because any bank would be nervous about dealing with anything remotely Russian connected to Kremlin, because they could be breaking some kind of sanctions or dealing with international criminal. So then the Kremlin regime would have probably no choice but to concentrate more on things that North Korea and those kinds of dictators do, where they concentrate on their weapons and maybe drug trafficking, and because if you can't get a good loan, you go and get a bad loan because you need money.
Correct. What Russians will go into argue, which will be also a silly thing to do, which also kind of reminds of what I just said about a 9-year-old. Putin will be saying that there was no word Putin mentioned in any documents. There are no documents showing his first name, last name, or what have you. The problem with this logic is that the U.S. government will argue, or any other argument, or government, or any other court or investigative committee or team, they know what the word to front means. That means that if a person is a so-called politically exposed person, this is a really very common abbreviation in the banking industry, politically exposed person, meaning PEP, or they call them PEPs, a PEP. A PEP meaning a politically exposed person. They cannot have bank accounts in the likes of private banking, in secret, more kind of secret banking sector of the world banking system. They are, of course, allowed to have bank accounts, such as, for example, President Obama would have a normal bank account, but this is all reported and accounted for. There could not be any type of secret bank accounts for any type of PEPs, of politically exposed persons. So what these PEPs do is they use a so-called frontman, some individuals that do not have a formal relationship with them by means of family ties or other, and there are no documents showing any links. But in the Arkady Rotenberg example, which I mentioned before, these are just very, very close friends. So is this guy who is a cello player, Mr. Aldugin, who is named in the recent, or rather today's portion of this corruption scandal. Sergei Aldugin is the guy who is like a childhood friend of Putin. He was the person who introduced him to the woman who later became Putin's wife, Lyudmila. Sergei Aldugin is a godfather to Putin's older daughter. And in fact, my father not only knew Sergei Aldugin, but he also worked closely with him by way of absolute coincidence. My father was a first viola, a principal viola at the Mariinsky orchestra in St. Petersburg, which was called Kirov Opera and Ballet House in Leningrad at the time. My father was principal viola, first viola in the orchestra, and Sergei Aldugin was first principal cello in the same orchestra. In fact, Aldugin got this position as the first viola because of his predecessor, Arkady Orlovsky, emigrated from the USSR to the United States in 1978, and his place became vacant, and that's how Aldugin got into that place. So today's revelations show Aldugin as one of the frontmen for Putin in all of this web of offshore bank accounts and transactions. Basically, we can now say that Sergei Aldugin is really fronting for Putin, and so do many other people.
So is the situation, I guess, that since having straw man is just as natural as, it's part of the offshoring experience for these level of individuals, then maybe okay, first of all, we can say that if you've known Putin since you both were kids, then right there, that explains, we can kind of write off your success to that. But also, it seems like for Putin, the most important thing has been to have this legitimacy, to have the air of, just a very successful person out west. And it seems like it's this image that's being damaged, and I think that maybe what hurts the most. What do you think?
Well, hurts the most whom and where?
I mean, it hurts Putin because the Kremlin is the one that seems to be concerned about this news leak, and everybody else wouldn't be as concerned about it because they presume that the government is corrupted, and they presume all these things. Now it just kind of verifies this, but it does solidify Putin's image as not a real, that ill-gotten gains out west, and therefore that takes away some legitimacy that he may have wanted, that maybe that's just not happening anymore.
Well, based on what I know, Putin, having come to power a while ago, as you know, he tried many times with many U.S. presidents over the course of these years, of last 16 years, to legitimize himself, his friends, and their wealth by trying to get a sort of a guarantee from a U.S. president, whether it was any of the U.S. presidents, George Bush Jr., or Clinton, or any presidents subsequent or their predecessors, by speaking with the current ones, by speaking with the former, or speaking with candidates, in order to find a solution to have some U.S. president guarantee their legitimate place, and they're basically legitimizing their wealth in the U.S. Because what Putin thought, again, having a mind of not an adult person, that legitimizing by the promise of the U.S. president would be a sort of ultimate recognition, because anybody else is just a U.S. monkey, whether it's Germany or the U.K. or any other country in the world. Doesn't really matter. What matters what the U.S. would do and what the U.S. president would guarantee. But it is obviously extremely naive and funny and way of thinking, and none of the U.S. presidents were able to not only not willing, but they were not being able to guarantee anything of that sort. And when Putin understood that, that's when he broke with the West, or you can probably say so, broke with the West by series of actions and rhetoric. One of good examples of which was his the so-called Munich speech, which he gave, I believe, in 2007. The Kremlin, they don't have expertise in order to evaluate the full consequences of what is happening today and over the course of last months. But I, on the other hand, wrote a post on my Facebook page, which was then taken by one of the most famous publications in Ukraine. It's called Gordon.com. That was I wrote this piece in the second half of November of 2014, and the heading was the financial intelligence units of U.S. Treasury keep the entire top government and Russian elite under their radar, and I argued that the Treasury and office called OFAC, headed by the then head of this office, Mr. Cohen, who subsequently became deputy head of CIA, they have all these documents, or at least some documents, which now have been provided by the media, including those of today. And in that article, I also referred to the entire story about Libyan Investment Authority. That was the equivalent of Libyan of the Russian state welfare fund. And when the U.S. government was freezing Libyan assets, that was exactly the Libyan Investment Authority assets that were frozen to the tune of $30 billion. That was a huge blow to Gaddafi. So the U.S. knows lots of stuff about corruption in the highest echelons of power in Russia. And it is just a matter of timing and a matter of conditions for the U.S. to release that. I believe that probably the annexation of Crimea and not moving further into the east of Ukraine with a full-blown military operation in order to annex half of Ukraine, in addition to Crimea, that was probably because the U.S. Signaled to the Kremlin that in this case they're going to deal with Putin as they were dealing with Gaddafi, in terms of freezing assets and sanctioning not 150 people like they did over the course of these 2 years, but sanctioning probably 3,000 people, and maybe turning the electronic payment system SWIFT off, and prosecuting people left, right, and center for money laundering, dealing with the U.S. dollars, which is a crime in the U.S.
Okay, and then with that in mind, how does the Panama Papers change that?
Well, first of all, I'm not an insider who is releasing what and by which, will and from which sources. We also have to recognize that all of this is now being leaked from, or not leaked, but published by the Guardian, the independent media sources, and this is a competitive field. It is a field of investigative journalism, and journalists know that Putin is under scrutiny because first of his highest level of any kind of possible corruption, and because of his crimes that he committed over the last 16 years, and especially those crimes that he had been committing over the last 2 years. And so the journalists felt that there is a huge demand for this kind of stuff. And if there is a demand, there should be a supply. So it's a competitive field. That's what they were smelling, that they were smelling blood here, and that's what they started doing. And maybe the U.S. Treasury and OFAC office were not the first movers here, but they certainly can feed what they want to feed to the media from among the documents that they also have.
You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report.